Welcome back to the Les Petites Saints Crochet blog. I'm Elise, and today I want to introduce you to little Olivia Otter. She is from the Animal Friends of Peek-a-Pow book, and I absolutely love her. And today I want to share the part 4 in my series Amigurumi 101, and we're talking about finishing touches today. This is the final installment, so if you haven't watched the first, second, or third parts, please go back and check those out. I will have the links for that below, whether you're on the blog or the YouTube channel. And if you stay till the end, I'm going to show you some of the secret imperfections that little Olivia has, and why I flubbed that word up, and why imperfections don't mean a dang thing. Just don't worry about them. Also, I would love to know where you're from, so please introduce yourself. YouTube and the blog are such an international community, and I would love to hear from you. So stay tuned and let's get started. I really believe that crocheting amigurumi is the best hobby. Number one, there are no practical reasons for making amigurumi. They simply exist to bring smiles to people's faces. They aren't utilitarian. They have no real purpose in life but to bring happiness and whimsy. And I can't think of a better reason than that to make them. While making amigurumi is wonderful, we still have some skills that we need to master, and these are our finishing touches. And we're going to go through each and every one of those today. And first of all, we're going to focus on embroidery. The second is eye placement. The third is stuffing. The fourth is pinning. The fifth is sewing. And the sixth is personal touches. The first finishing touch is embroidery. Most of the amigurumi I make require a little bit of facial embroidery to get those little details, and for little Olivia here, it is all in her snout area. So one of the things that I always do is I embroider the snout before I attach it, because otherwise it would be really difficult, and I don't want to do it that way. A tip that I can give you is that when you are embroidering something that is not attached yet, you're going to have at least 1 or 2 yarn ends that are really long that you're going to be using to sew the snout onto the face with. I tend to like to keep those kind of out of the way. I pull them out of the way because your embroidery floss can get really tangled up there. My tip number 2 is that I like to use embroidery floss. Some people like to use yarn, and I have used that before, and it's fine. I just tend to like the neatness of embroidery floss. It's also really cheap, and you can find it virtually anywhere. Number 2, the next thing I really want to talk about is when you are making this embroidery part of the face, some of this is a little bit forgiving, like this section here where you're kind of satin stitching and you're filling in this part of the snout. One thing that is not forgiving is this vertical, any kind of vertical lines. It is not forgiving. So I'm going to tell you what I did here. So when I started from the top, I worked down to the first little stitch there, and that went right in between 2 crochet stitches, right in between them. But for this one, for me to get this completely straight, I needed to split a stitch. I had to go in between 1 stitch. And that's because of the nature of crochet. It kind of leans to the right a little bit if you're a right-handed crocheter. So it is more important to have a straight line here, because visually you will notice if it's off. And to split that stitch, you'll never notice that part. So I just wanted to give you a couple little tips, and watch it in the video, and happy stitching. Finishing touch number 2 is eye placement. So I usually look at a pattern to see what size eyes and where they are supposed to go. But now I only use that as a guide. I put my eyes wherever I want to put my eyes. But I will tell you one thing, I never add them until I put the snout on first. Snout comes first and then I add the eyes. Now I will try different sizes to see which ones I like, if I like a really big eye or a little eye. And I place them in and I try to get them as even as possible, stitches beside the snout, and sometimes that's possible and sometimes it isn't, and I'm just not going to worry about it. If it visually looks good, then I'm fine with it. The other trick is that I do not put the backs on those suckers until I am 100% sure I am happy with the size and the placement, because for the most part, when you put the backs on those eyes, they aren't coming out, and that's not fun if you decide you don't like it. So just wait to put the backs on as long as possible, and I hope you enjoyed these little tips. Finishing touch number 3 is stuffing. Now for the most part, I like to stuff most of the body parts really full. I like them nice and full, and one thing to know is that stuffing will deflate over time. So especially in the body and in the head and in the neck area, you want to make sure that that is stuffed really well. Now I have a couple of exceptions to that. Number 1 are the arms. Actually, it's the only one. The arms are pretty much a little bit different. I like to stuff them about 2/3 of the way full. I don't stuff the top third part because otherwise the arms will be like this. And I've done that before, and I have some that look like that. So if you leave this part unstuffed, it just helps the arms to lay down a little bit. Now hers will begin to lay down a little bit more because she just got stuffed yesterday. The other trick is that, okay, you know, you get those little bamboo kind of sticks that come in a polyfill pack. What I actually like to do is I break them in half, and this actually happened by accident, and I found like this is marvelous. So you kind of have, if you break it in half, one of the edges is kind of jagged and one of the edges is smooth. The smooth edge sometimes can slip around stuffing, but the jagged edge, sort of because of the nature of it, it kind of grabs some of those fibers and it's easier to stuff inside. Also, trick number 2 is I like to use an eraser, like on the end of a pencil. And somehow that little rubbery end kind of grabs fibers as well, and it makes it a little bit easier, especially when you're stuffing something really small like a snout or an arm. Also, the biggest tip I can give you is to stuff little bits at a time. If you grab big clumps and you stuff them in there, sometimes that can look lumpy, and it can actually, you can see it in the shape of your amigurumi body particularly. So I like to add little bits as I go. Tip number 4 is pinning and placing. I really recommend taking the time to pin your body parts on before you begin sewing. One of the benefits of this is that you can kind of play around and see where you like those body parts. For example, particularly the ears. You can think, okay, well, I can put them up higher and see what they look like pinning them there, or I can put them lower and see where you like them. And I really feel like that is a great thing to do before you sew them on, because you may find afterwards, oh wait, they're not even, or ooh, I wish I had added those a little bit higher. So really pin those on. Another thing that I like to do is, I know this is a little bit of me, but I like to have the ears, the arms, and the legs all just kind of line up. That's just one of those little things that I really like to do. You certainly don't have to do it, but I think it kind of looks nice, and it makes it kind of easier to know, like, okay, I usually put the arms on first, and like, okay, now the ears need to go above that, and it's got to line up with the legs. So that's the little trick I have, and really pinning is just something that becomes habit, and I hope this helped you. Tip number 5 is sewing on body parts. Now I know this is one of those techniques that gets beginners really concerned and can cause a little bit of problems. This is where it really does take practice, and I know you're probably sick of me saying that word, but I have to say it over and over. This does really take practice. Now, there are parts that I am very finicky about how I sew them on, and then there are parts that really don't matter too much because you're not going to really see them. Number one, the snout. I am very particular about adding the snout because if it's messy, you're gonna see it. What I do for the snout, and you will see this in the video, is I go underneath and out one of the stitches on the last row of the snout. I come up and I go down the next stitch. I catch the stitch on the face, come up the next stitch on the snout, go down the next stitch on the snout, catch a piece of the face, a stitch of the face, and I keep going around. And sometimes that means that you're going to miss some stitches, and sometimes that means I go around more than once. I also pull it taut, but not so tight that it distorts any of the fabric at all. So that's what I do for the snout, and you'll see how I do that in the video. But for the ears and the arms and the tail, I am much less careful. For ears and arms, really what I do is a horizontal technique. I horizontally go through the stitches, and then I catch a stitch in the body part and catch horizontally a stitch in the head or the body. And that way, and I pull it really taut. You really don't see the stitches, but it's not super neat. But to be honest, you are never, ever going to notice that. I promise. I promise. Like with her little arms, you are never going to notice how I join them. What you are going to notice is if they are not joined well and they fall off. That is 100%. So be finicky about things that you need to be finicky with, and don't be finicky about things that don't matter. The other tip I have before sewing is I always like to close any body parts that are open. For instance, in the arms, I close the arms before I sew them on. With the ears, they are typically open on the ends. I close them by just sewing back and forth to close them before I join them. I also sew all the way around. I don't just sew the front, I sew around, I sew the side, I sew the back, and then the other side. I always do that so that it is joined on there really well, that some little kid is pulling on it, they're not gonna come off. Finishing touch number 6 is weaving in the ends. Now, what I like to do, which is what you normally do with crochet, is I leave a long end and I weave it in and I hide it in the stitches, and so that you are never going to see it. But my big recommendation is to not weave your ends in until you are 100% sure you like where that body part is. Trust me on this, trust me. It is not fun to have to take something out that the ends have already been woven in. For example, say you've got the snout and you think, okay, I like it, it's perfect, and you weave all the ends in and you are completely done, and you get a few rows down and you're like, I'm not so sure. I really think that could have been a couple of stitches higher. Well, guess what? It is not fun to take that out if you have already woven those ends in, and it may actually mean that you have to cut it out, and if you have to do that, you may have to redo the entire snout. So what I like to do is I leave those ends, those long ends, pretty much until the very end, and I know that I like where that body part is, and then and only then do I weave my ends in. Personal touches is probably my favorite part of making amigurumi. This is where you can really let your skills shine through or make that toy your very own. For little Olivia, I added a little hair bow, and I just think it makes her look so cute, and it just adds that little special touch that is not in the pattern. And so what you can do is you can add things, you can eliminate things, you can even change things, and that will create a totally unique, one-of-a-kind toy that you will treasure forever and ever. My final recommendation is to throw perfect in the trash. Ain't nobody got time for perfection here. Now listen, Olivia is adorable, and I think she is totally adorable, but she is absolutely 100% not perfect, and I am going to show you why she's not perfect. Number one, do you see the color jog there? That should be in the back of the head, but I made a mistake. When I was putting the snout on, I did not pay close enough attention, and normally what I do is look for that color jog and put the snout directly across. So her snout should be over here. But I wasn't paying good attention, and I added it right here. And I didn't realize it until much later, and then I thought, well, I could redo this whole thing, or I could keep going and get it done, and I chose to just get it done. Number 2, her snout, there's a color jog there, and it goes down here, and I did not match this up well to the color work on the face. Could I have fixed that? I could have, but I decided that I didn't think it was going to make that much of a difference. It didn't bother me, so I was going to keep it. And that is what I want to hammer into everybody, is that perfect is the enemy of good. Perfect is the enemy of done. How many times have we thought, well, it's got to be perfect, and you keep doing it, and then you make yourself miserable, and then you won't finish it? I am getting over that, and I am loving the imperfect in everything that I make now. Thank you for stopping by the Les Petites Saintes Crochet, where Olivia and I are so glad that you came by today. Now, if you would subscribe to my channel, I'll be your best friend forever. And if you will hit that like button and share this channel with other people, that would be wonderful. And make sure to leave some comments. I would love to know where you're from and interact with you, and it just warms my heart. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week.